Hello, guys. How are you keeping? So, this week we are looking at data analysis techniques, and I'll be taking you through the slides quickly to give you an overview of what you have to remember, what you have to learn and improve on in your quest to becoming a competent forensic accountant. So, bits of what we did in the training session with Catherine would come up today. But you'll agree with me that most of the work you do as a forensic accountant revolves around the collection, the processing of relevant data. So we'll be talking about how to obtain, process, and present relevant data for the different roles that you'll be involved in as a forensic accountant. Primarily, we'll be talking about the key data collection and analysis techniques, mainly talking about interviews, observations, and data mining, etc. I think at the very end of these slides to give you an overview, and then I'll home in on some of the key things. So I've created this mnemonic here for you. When you think about data as a forensic accountant, these are the things that should be on your mind, right? I don't know if you like my mnemonic, the spade mnemonic. So the key skills that you need are things like being very skeptical. So skepticism is about not taking things at face value. Right? So most of the time, you've got to be quite critical, analytical, and have a question in mind, whether the data is given to you by a colleague or by a client or you've taken it from a government source. You should always be checking, thinking through whether that piece of data takes you to the truth. Okay? Because most of the time, you're kind of helping the trial of truth, as we put it. You're trying to support the jury or the judge or the litigants to finding the truth. So you've got to be very skeptical, not gullible, and pursue the truth until you're convinced that you found it. And to get that, you have to probe, right? You have to communicate, you have to interact with people, you have to keep an open mind, of course, but you have to be probing, you have to be searching. You need some techniques, so that's where the analytics come in. So you have to have some basic data processing competencies, right? Both qualitative and quantitative data should be able to play with that. So that's where the analytics come in. And computers or software, various bits of software are out there now to make that bit easier. But that does not take away the skill, the human intuition, right? Your ability to make reliable judgments that can never be done by a computer, right? So the software will do the analytics for you, and then you have to put on your thinking cap, and you've got to probe, you've got to weigh the evidence, and you have to come up with an opinion. Of course, documents will play a key role in all that. So various pieces of documents, right, will be there, and you've got to find them, you've got to assess them. Remember what we did the other week, where we spoke about document analysis and detection of forgery and all that. So in doing all this, you're making sure that you're being skeptical, you're probing, you're using your tools, you're getting the documents, and you're always evaluating. Okay, so let's go back. Let's go all the way back to kind of the beginning. And what I'll do now is I would say a few words about how you can ensure that you apply the spade techniques to help you find the truth from the data that will be available out there. So when we say data analysis, we're really talking about how do you go about your work as a forensic accountant to make sure that you find the right pieces of information that are reliable. Okay, you don't want to stand up in court, or you don't want to write a report based on data that is not correct, or data that is a lie. Okay, so validity and reliability are your destinations. That's where you want to get to. You want to make sure you found the right information, and you want to also make sure that it's correct and it's the best. Okay, and that doesn't happen by accident, right? You don't just suddenly boom find that. You've got to uh, do the right things to maximize the probability. That's the word. You're increasing the probability that you're finding the right and the best. So you follow the classic research approach. You have to begin by understanding what the problem is. What is it that I'm working on, right? What kind of forensic role am I involved in? Remember, this comes up at a time when you're accepting the the client and the role. Right? You've got to really do that background research and understand what the problem is. Once you've screened the role or the task, and you've accepted it, you have to go on and use your knowledge and your experience to hypothesize. So to hypothesize means you begin to think about what could be the likely leads, what are the probable questions that I have to answer, right? So you have to come up with some hunches, some ideas, right? And by scoping it out that way and looking at what is likely and what is possible, you then have to go on and identify the relevant sources of data. And that again will touch on the people or the places or the systems and the types of data that are relevant to that assignment. Collect it, keep it in a good place, right? Make sure that the data is not contaminated, right? That contamination can come from yourself, right? Your own beliefs, your own biases can impact on finding the truth. So you've got to be objective, you've got to stay impartial, and you have to, of course, keep the data safe so that it's not corrupted. Okay, and then you analyze it and you come to a conclusion and use that as the basis of writing your report, your very famous report, which, remember, will stand up to scrutiny, right? Especially if you have to go to court. So that's an overview again, right? The data will either be primary or secondary. I know you know this already. Primary, if it is very specific, if you have had to go out there and find in yourself in relation to the problem. Or secondary, with respect to the fact that that data exists somewhere out there and you're going to tap in. It could be in the form of documents like financial statements, like time sheets, like pay slips, and so documents that people have signed, and so on and so forth. Okay, so in doing data analysis, remember the problem that you have on hand is key, right? So you don't just go around with a hammer, right, knocking every problem as if it's a nail, right? You don't have just one solution to every problem. You have to look at the context of the assignment or the role that you have as a forensic accountant, and by understanding the problem, you'll be able to do your classic who is involved, why were they involved, how were they involved, when were they involved, that kind of thing, right? You have to draw kind of that network diagram by identifying the people, the places, the times, and getting that understanding. So in the case of fraud, I know we spoke briefly about the fraud triangle. If you think we didn't, please go back on Moodle. I think a couple of weeks ago, there is that big article that I put up there on fraud and the fraud triangle and how useless sometimes it is, right? But remember, it's also useful because it gives you the basic understanding of why people sometimes do the wrong things in terms of being dishonest and committing fraud. Okay, so the fraud triangle talks about incentives and pressure, opportunity, and rationalization or attitude. So if you were thinking about some fraud issue, a fraud task or a fraud assignment, before you go collecting data, you need to start thinking about who could have the incentive to have done the thing that has been done. Right? So that could be a case of embezzlement of funds or diversion of funds. Who could have the incentive or the the inkling to do that? Who has the opportunity to do that? Who could have done it? So by asking yourself these questions, you're trying to find out the people, right? So if somebody could not have had the opportunity to do it, you must have a reason to exclude them. So if you have people in the finance team who could have embezzled the funds, you're kind of looking at proximity here, right? Who has access? Who could have had access? Where were the people when the people in the team when these events were going on? So you may have to trace where they were, what they were doing, what tasks they've been assigned to by looking at their logins if they are using systems. You may have to look at the lifestyle or, if you like, the interests of the people involved. Is there anything happening that could incentivize someone to want or need that amount of money? And start thinking about how their attitudes to work, the way they go about their duties, could make them the likely criminal, and so on and so forth. So you're kind of analyzing the problem context to identify the types of data that you would need to collect to help you uh, identify the truth. Okay, so that's how other concepts like the fraud triangle could help you with identification of relevant or valid data. So there are types of data. Not much to say here. I think you know that data could be qualitative, quantitative, and all that. But from the forensic accountant's point of view, it is probably better to conceptualize or to look at data as either static, right? So data that sits there, or data that will not be sitting there, but you need to do something to find it. Okay, so in that regard, we probably would say there are documentary data, so data which are in the form of records, financial records, communication records, phone logs, and all that, photographs, organizational charts. Those are pieces of static data that sit somewhere. Okay, and then you can also think about interactive data, data that will only be available to you as a forensic accountant if you do something, right? You don't have to just go and sit there, you have to be involved somehow. So in the form of interviews, observations, and in that regard, you're kind of relating to people to be able to squeeze the data out of them. If you have that picture in mind, then what you're saying is for most forensic accounting roles, you would need both, right? You need sometimes more of one than the other, but you need to look at them as complementary, right? You don't hold one as a gold standard and the other as not useful, right? Because it's when you blend the two that you're able to corroborate, right? You're able to synthesize and affirm that it is more likely that this is the truth. So with that, we will spend a bit more time talking about interviews, because interviews are very important most of the time when you need to assess the validity of the hunches or the hypothesis that you have formed. You need to plan the interview to get it right. See? Right? So plan it, stage it, or execute it But one of the key things that come up is that at the time when you're holding the interview, you've got to be, of course, very objective, very impartial, and you've got to create the environment that will get your interviewee to kind of be themselves and tell you the truth. Okay? And to help them do that, you've got to be an active listener. And I'll suggest that that's not just for interviews, right? As a professional, wherever you go, be an active listener, right? Take interest in what is being said, right? And your non-verbal uh, skills or your non-verbal behavior will really have an impact on the person you're interacting with. So your eyes, right? We, well, I sometimes say that intelligence shines through the eyes, right? Keep an eye contact, right, with the person you're interviewing. Show interest in what they're saying. Try not to interrupt them. Let them feel like they are part of the conversation, right? Nod, accept. Usually, if you write things down, if whatever the person says, you try and you take notes, that also encourages them to accept that you believe them. Sorry. So show interest, right? And give them the chance to talk. Be very clear in your questioning and pay attention, right? Watch everything that they do, right? After you've built that confidence and trust, the chances are that the person will be more relaxed, and people tell the truth most of the time when they are relaxed. Okay, I know there are other instances where different interviewing skills will be used, but in your role as a forensic accountant, you're normally trying to get people to be themselves so that you can understand their side of the story. So look and listen. Look, because as we will talk about in a minute, the non-verbal side sometimes says more than the words that come out of people, right? So use follow-up questions, right? So if the person gives an answer, right, because you're listening, you may want to clarify. So if you ask a question, where were you on Monday, the 10th of August, 2019? The person says, I think I did not come to work that day. And then you probably will follow up by asking the question, can you please tell me why you were not at work that day? Right, because that could be relevant to the problem that you're trying to understand. So show interest and ask follow-up questions. And sometimes it's when you follow up and you follow up that if the person is lying, it becomes very obvious that they are trying to build some towers in the sky without a foundation, and it all comes crumbling down. Okay, so it's very important that you encourage them and don't let them feel threatened. Let them feel like they are part of the conversation, and let them go on and on. And of course, if you have their consent, you will be recording this. Once you be recording the interview, sometimes when you have gone back and listened to the interview again, you're able to pick up on things that either add up or do not add up. So interviewing skills are very, very important. I had a this list here from, I think, one of the recommended texts that talks about nonverbal communication. So it's very important that we are aware of the fact that consciously and most of the time unconsciously, our body, our posture, movement of hands and eyes and all that are either consistent with the words we're saying or inconsistent. Having said that, be a bit careful because there are some cultural variations in the way people position their body and use their body and all that. So, for example, there are usual signals that somebody could be lying, right? So, it is usually believed that when people blink unusually like that, continuously blinking, or when their hands are moving around their face and they are not comfortable and they are hiding their hands, especially. Sometimes that suggests that they have something to hide, and so on and so forth. But be a bit careful. I mean, I think I gave you that example that sometimes we believe that when people shake their head that way, it means no. But culturally, in some cultures, when people do that, they actually mean yes. So be open to that and be careful. But otherwise, always pay attention to what people are doing with their bodies when they're talking to you, because that could either confirm what they're saying or make you doubt the authenticity of the claims they're making. So what have we said so far? You're all about going out there to find the truth. The truth doesn't come barging into you. You have to search for it. You've got to be structured in your process, and you've got to be able to use your interviewing skills. There are types of questions that will be relevant. I think some of you who attended the court skills training event saw that the trainer was using the same approach. So you would normally, even in cross-examination, you would normally start with some very basic introductory questions, and you're trying to get at some facts or confirm the facts that you have, and then you have to go on and ask some probing, or if you like informational questions, and that's where you're normally trying to sometimes unsettle the person and challenge some of the claims they've made to really check to see if it will stand to scrutiny. Okay, so sometimes you ask the same question in different ways to check to see if the answer that comes up is consistent, and you're sometimes summarizing what people have said and asking them to reflect on it. Okay, so for example, if you were interviewing somebody who is suspected of fraud, you start with your introductory questions. You then go on and you ask some very informational questions, always paying attention to their non-verbal communication, and you really scrutinize them. Sometimes what you get is you get them admitting that they've done what they initially said they haven't done. And it's then very important to get them to confess, right? Get them to, on record, say precisely what they did. If they haven't shown any signs of deception or they haven't admitted guilt, then of course you would conclude the interview. So you've got to have done your background research to be able to see which areas of the story that they've told in the past doesn't stand to scrutiny, and then you would focus primarily on that. It's also good to think about observation. So observation, which is part of the interview, but sometimes you're not there asking questions. Sometimes you're just going to a place, or you're attending the working environment, or you're collecting documents and you're observing them. I think a bit of observation techniques came up in our forgery detection session, so I don't have much to really say here, right? If you question a document, if you are not sure about the authenticity of a document, then you have to go through the process of usually confirming whether it's been forged, or getting a document examiner or a graphologist, as we said, to come in and check. Data mining techniques. This is where you sometimes would have massive amounts of data. So we're talking about huge transactional records that you're trying to check sometimes if there's fraud and things like that. You cannot cope mentally doing it yourself. This is where software comes in. Okay, so there are various types of software, and I'll leave you to go over that. All right, so you came across some of these techniques in your first year when you did a quantitative methods module with Jarlin, and some of you would have seen some of these techniques and software in the data analytics module. I don't really have much to say. It will be boring if I just repeat them, but I think these are facts that you can look at. So coming back to the end, data is what you thrive on as a forensic accountant, and you've got to be able to identify the right sources of data, and you have to go and collect it somehow, right? Record keeping is quite crucial. Keep records of all the data and sit back and put the pieces together to check to see if the story or the stories that you've been told are coherent, they all fit together. If they don't, then you have to identify the person or the people or the places where the errors or the inconsistencies are coming from, and you have to maybe go there in person, observe or question people and get their responses, and come back and reflect before you write your report. So you can see we haven't been quite selective. We've just said all types of data are relevant, whether they are qualitative or quantitative, written, unwritten. You've got to pursue it. When you find it, you smile, you come home, you analyze it, and you figure a report together. Right, so that is the lecture done for you. What I will do later on today is I'll be putting up your Spot the Error activity. I can assure you that this week's Spot the Error is about business valuation, right? We finished the accounting bit and we're moving on to financial management, and then we'll come back to the management accounting tax. Okay, all the best, and I'll see you soon.